Hello, welcome to the British Food History Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Neil Buttery, food historian and chef. My guest today is Mark Dawson, food historian specialising in the food of the Tudor period, but also the food of Derbyshire. So the perfect person to talk about Derbyshire Oatcakes with. Quick headline before we get started though, all of the guests have now been revealed for the Serve It Forth Food History Festival on the 18th of October 2025. You can find descriptions of all the events on the website. There's a link in the show notes. If you missed it last week, my guest, who's kicking things off with me, is the fantastic Tom Parker Bowles, who is, amongst many other things, a bastion for traditional British cooking, which is handy because that's what we're talking about. Well, that, as well as a little look at the food eaten by some British monarchs. Friend of the show, Brigitte Webster, is taking part in Sam Bilton's session about Shakespearean food. The wonderful Netherton Foundry, who I'm a big fan of, they're sponsoring the festival. It's very exciting. There will be a bonus episode of the pod next time telling you more about it. So I'm not going to say everything now, but one thing that you need to go away with is this piece of knowledge. Tickets are £16. You can buy them via Eventbrite. Link is also in show notes. You can still get early bird tickets with 25% off until the 14th of September 2025, so don't wait around. Season 9 of the podcast is sponsored by Fruit Pig, Britain's last remaining commercial craft producer of fresh blood black puddings. Fruit Pig, aka Matthew Cockin and Grant Harper, put a huge amount of care and attention into harvesting fresh blood to create a very delicious traditional black pudding. Also available are their gluten-free black puddings, their decadent hog's pudding, and traditional haggis. They also make some excellent dry-cured bacon and sell some great British charcuterie. Check out your local butcher. They may just stock them. My local butcher does. Visit fruitpig.com for more details of their products and journey. You can find your local stockists there and access their shop. And they are very kindly giving listeners to the podcast a unique special offer. 10% off your order until the end of October 2025. Use the offer code FOODHIS in the checkout. FOODHIS is all one word, FOODHIS, capital F. Please support them. Their products really are fantastic. Okay, back to today. I am talking with Mark Dawson, food historian specialising in the 16th and 17th centuries, focusing upon his part of the country, the East Midlands of England. Much of his work has focused on the 16th century household accounts of the Willoughby family of Woolerton near Nottingham and Middleton in Warwickshire. They are mentioned in today's chat, in fact, and he's written a book on his research on that family, published by Prospect Books, called Plenti and Grase. He's also on the board of the Leeds Symposium of Food History and Traditions. It's got its 40th birthday coming up next year, which is very exciting. He's also done quite a lot of work on Derbyshire Oatcakes, a food not eaten quite as much today as years gone by. It was once a key staple food. Not the case these days, sadly. Mark and I talk about the oatcakes of Britain, as well as Derbyshire Oatcakes, doshens and sprittles, the usefulness of probate inventories, oatcakes as penance, and oatcake goblins, amongst many other things. Those listening to the Secret Podcast can hear about other Derbyshire foods made from oats, a discussion about why oatcake is better than porridge, and I grill Mark on the very important thing, just what is the difference between a Derbyshire and a Staffordshire oatcake? It's what we all want to know. I'll be back at the end, but for now, please enjoy Derbyshire Oatcakes with Mark Dawson. Hello and welcome to the podcast, Mark. Before we get started, could you just tell listeners a little bit about yourself and how you become interested in Derbyshire Oatcakes?
Right, well, I'm Mark Dawson. I'm interested in food history. It's not my job, but it's something I enjoy doing in my spare time. And I got into it, or got interested in it, probably about 25 years ago, in general about food history. Did a PhD at Nottingham and was looking at the household accounts of the Willoughby family in the Tudor period. So my initial interest was in the Tudor period, and then writing about the food and drink in that household and what they're eating. And mainly interested actually in what the servants were eating. And when I completed that, it felt like I didn't want it to come to an end. I didn't want sort of whole research into food history to just end at that point. So I started doing talks. I put together some talks on food and drink in Nottinghamshire, food and drink in Derbyshire, kind of local ones to do local history societies, and looked at other sorts of evidence. I came across, started using probate inventories and looking at what people had in their households. And it seemed like one thing sort of led to another, in that I got interested in what sort of things people were cooking, what ordinary people were cooking. And this is going to sound very esoteric, but the differences between Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, which are two fairly small counties in the East Midlands in England, but there were certainly substantive differences between the things people had in their households. And one of the things that was coming out was sort of to do with making bread. And Derbyshire was, or certain parts of Derbyshire anyway, at least, were oatcake eating areas where they made and they ate oatcakes. That was the main form of bread. So I had this sort of in my mind, and I came across, was introduced to a lady called Nikki Crew, who worked at the time at Haddon Hall, and she had written her BA thesis on oatcakes.
Good.
Whilst she was a student in the 70s at Leeds University. And she very kindly let me read. I mean, I still can't remember in my head exactly how I got to talk to this lady about oatcakes, but it came up in conversation. And anyway, so I ended up reading her thesis that she sort of brought along for me to have a look through, and started researching about oatcakes. My external examiner, who I'd had for my PhD, Professor Chris Dyer, was organising a conference at Leicester, which happened in 2014 at Leicester University in honour of Joan Thirsk, who died, sort of agricultural historian. And she'd latterly sort of written things about food and drink. And he knew I was, obviously he knew I wrote about food and drink. And I mentioned this thing about sort of oatcakes. He asked if I got anything could do at this conference, and I mentioned about the oatcakes. And he said, yeah, that'd be great. Do something about Derbyshire oatcakes. So that's really how I started. And as you know, we are sat in Derbyshire. It's where I'm from. So that was the other big appeal, if you like.
It's a niche food, right? But I think we don't realise, certainly if you may be further north than, say, Birmingham, just how important oats were just to daily life. We think of maybe people who are maybe in the upper echelons of society, right up until, maybe Georgian times, to be having all the white bread, the wheat bread, and your working classes, I suppose, having wholemeal, but still wheat bread. But it's not the case for really the most of Great Britain, is it?
There were surveys done in the 18th century, various surveys. David Davis is one, and Arthur Young in travels sort of through the north of England, recording the types of bread that people ate. And down through much of southern and eastern England, then wheat was the most common grain that was consumed all the way through society. Mm-hmm. But at that date, still in large parts of the north of England, it was different grains. Through large parts of the sort of East Midlands and upwards, it was rye bread. Through East Yorkshire, it was rye bread. And you got barley bread in certain parts of Northumberland. In fact, in Norfolk as well, and Cheshire. And then sort of down the spine of England, from the Lake District through Lancashire, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, Staffordshire, Derbyshire, that sort of upland areas, oats was the grain that was grown because it was the grain that grew reliably. It survived the rainfall that they got, or that they still get, it's raining now. And it also meant it could also be planted later and harvested later. It withstood lower temperatures. It was a more reliable grain for people to grow to provide food for the local community than was wheat. So the rich people still wanted wheat who lived in those areas, and in the selected areas where it would grow reliably, or where it would grow, the little valleys where it would grow, or lowland areas where it grew, then yes, they grew it, and they provided sort of enough wheat for themselves, for the rich. But it was a lot more expensive, and for the majority of the populace, they lived off the grain that grew reliably in those areas, which, as I say, was oats.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because wheat's just not grown very well there. You got to import it, really. It's just
exactly, yeah. You can't rely on it.
No,
yeah, so you can't rely on it. So you don't want to starve. So you grow something that's going to reliably will crop year after year, and therefore oats was the crop.
So would you say the oatcake is maybe not the most common way of preparing oats, but it was certainly the most loved?
Yeah, although I think it's probably, I don't know really, it's hard to say. It's, as I say, I think it's probably the iconic food of those areas where they grew oats as the main crop. It's certainly what people talk about when they come to these areas from outside, the fact that they have this oat bread, and that's what they have instead of bread. It's the thing that hits people when they travel.
And I guess it's portable as well. It's just occurring to me. Yes. You can pick it up and take it.
Exactly.
To
you
work
can't pick up a bowl of porridge, but you could walk into the field with your oatcake. And later on, when they're the descriptions of mill hands eating them, they can stand up oatcake in hand while having a break.
Yes, so maybe a bit more effort to make than a porridge, but it's so much more useful.
Yes,
so
indeed, yeah. And you can batch make them as well. So you can make them in advance, like you can with bread. It's a food then that's storable that you can eat later on. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking about Derbyshire Oatcakes here, actually. We need to maybe take a little step out because most of the Midlands, north of England, then going up into Scotland, have their own variety of oatcakes, but there's quite a diversity, isn't there? I would imagine most people, when they think of an oatcake, they think of a Scottish oatcake, which is really a biscuit for cheese these days. That's how most of us eat them.
Yes.
But there was actually quite a big diversity in different oatcakes, wasn't there, across the country? Across the island.
To the two countries, yeah. I mean, there is. Yeah, I mean, there's the Scottish oatcakes, as you say, the sort of biscuit type ones. You've then got a sort of a Northern English, if you like, sort of range of oatcakes, which I think have by and large disappeared.
Yeah.
One's made in the Lake District, down in sort of northern parts of Yorkshire and Lancashire, which have almost gone.
Riddle breads, havercakes. Is that right? Plat bread, yes.
And they're thin oatcakes, which are invariably hung up to dry. And so that's sort of part of the process is they're made, cooked, but they're quite thin, and they're then left to dry, and they form a kind of a crisp bread that's then stored for weeks, months even. But you become sort of south to sort of what is now South Yorkshire, sort of southern end of the Pennines, Staffordshire and Derbyshire, then there's a different type of oatcake being made there, which is made with a batter, which is poured onto a bake stone, and it's generally cooked thicker. And it's eaten while it's soft. So when it's made, it's generally eaten within a few days of it being made. So that's the key difference, really, between that southern, if you like, oatcake and the ones made further north, which are sort of crisper, or which are dried till they're crisp.
When I was reading your research, I liked that there was such a thing as a southern oatcake zone.
Well, in my head there is. I don't know if it's actually... I don't think it really existed, but
the SOZ.
There are certainly traditions that are common across certain areas, and across Staffordshire, across Staffordshire Moorlands, Derbyshire Peak District, southern part of Yorkshire, southern Yorkshire. Then you've got this tradition that's common across the three counties of making these oatcakes with a sort of a thick pouring batter, and then eating them within days, while they're still kind of soft and floppy.
Yeah, no, it's good because it really crystallised things in my mind, because it's almost like there's little striations as you go up north. Things getting drier and more biscuity.
Yes.
So you get to snappy biscuits in Scotland.
In Scotland, yeah.
God, it was very good. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to drop Southern Oatcake Zone into conversation as much as I can. How did folk make them, and what went into a batter? Because the devil's in the detail with these simple foods. It sounds simple, but actually to get them really right, it takes quite a lot of skill and the right equipment and a lot of judgment and that kind of stuff, doesn't it? I think
it does. Yes, there is skill involved in making these things, which I'd come on to leads me to believe that this isn't a job that everybody does by any means.
Right.
But water and oatmeal basically traditionally is all that would be used to make the batter. Perhaps a little bit of salt, but they don't. But traditionally it's just water and oatmeal. Nothing else is used to make them. In and around, say in that. Now we're going to specifically talk about just that sort of the southern oatcake.
Yes.
There is a description of making oatcakes in Derbyshire in the early 19th century.
Right.
Which was written down by a guy called John Ferry. It's in a series of books called The General View of Agriculture and Minerals of Derbyshire. There's 3 volumes on this. There were similar reports done for other counties in England. And it was kind of a government response to the Napoleonic Wars and of sort of a crisis in agriculture. How can we feed ourselves? How will we cope?
Right.
And so there are all these surveys done, minute surveys of the state of the realm of each county. And John Ferry does the one for Derbyshire. He describes all kinds of things about the county, but he goes into the making of oatcakes. This is what people here grow a lot of oats, and this is what they do with them. And he talks about going to a farm, which is actually on the Derbyshire-Staffordshire border, a place called Pillsbury. Mr. Joseph Gould is the guy who runs the farm.
Right.
And he says, I've seen the process of baking for his farm servants and made the following notes. And then he talks about how they made the oatcakes. So they've got a batter, which is thicker than that's used for pancakes, and it's poured onto a bake stone. Here, in this case, he said a cast iron plate with a fire underneath it. But he does also say they do have stone bake stones elsewhere. He's seen them. And he said it's poured from a wooden dish. But he also talks about how the batter for it has been stored for some days in a thing called a doshen.
Doshen, okay.
And, so it's been stored in this doshen apparently, and that's where it is just the water and the oatmeal. However, because it's been in there and this doshen is never washed, it's obviously got shall we say germs, bacteria, yeast have come out of the atmosphere, and that is used as the raising agent. So there's no specific raising agent added. It's just the fact that they've been using this doshen for the last 50 years or whatever.
People will be saying it's an artisan sourdough. That's
Indeed,
what people will be saying now.
It is. It's a kind of sourdough. That's how they basically. That's what they're using. That's how they're getting that additional ingredient into there.
People think there is no sourdough culture or live fermented culture in Britain, like we missed it or something, but it's just not true. We've just forgotten it all.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and this is one of the things actually, you start to look by, you see things in probate inventories. You see doshens mentioned in Derbyshire, and at first you'd wonder what the heck is a doshen? Yeah. And you get into it and you find out that's what it is. Over in Nottinghamshire, you see leaven tubs. In the 17th century, so there's a sourdough culture there as well. It's just making different sorts of breads. So you mentioned sourdough. Yeah, I think they were being made through, I'm sure, in other places too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they pour this batter out and they spread it over with the back of over the bake stone with the back of a wooden ladle until it's around 1/4 of an inch thick and 16 to 18 inches in diameter.
Oh wow!
So these are quite substantial things.
I was thinking, I don't know, 8 like a 7-inch single size.
Well, yes, no, these are beyond an LP. Yeah, these are quite big. I mean, and he's describing them as 16 to 18 inches in diameter. There are subsequent descriptions in the 1940s by a chap called Dr. Thomas Bedford, who was a Leeds physician, and he got interested in the history of oatcakes across Northern England, and he describes them similarly. He has correspondents that people he talks to. They similarly describe making them in Derbyshire as being like 16 to 18 inches across. So they were being made quite large up until the latter part of the 20th century.
Is that because they're like a big sharing naan you get at the Indian restaurant?
Well,
or is it just efficiency?
I think
Cooking
it's
a big
because
one is just efficient.
It's probably because it's efficient. It's also because it is all you're eating in the way of bread. So, it's got to be a substantial thing to feed someone who's been working out in the fields or who's been working on a lead mine. It's got to be a fairly substantial. If you're now talk about how much servants eat and sort of the research I did on the Willoughbys and whatever, the amount that people were getting in terms of the amount of bread that they're being given is around about a couple of pounds. People are likely to be eating a large amount of bread where they're eating bread. So where they're eating oatcakes, similarly, they're going to be eating a large amount of oatcakes. A couple of big oatcakes is probably what people are getting, probably munching their way through. Yeah,
well, the number of calories people must have had to put away.
Indeed.
So I guess the only people who need to eat the amount of calories that people were eating 250 years ago are like Olympic gymnasts or athletes. They're the only ones who need to eat 10,000 calories a day. These people who are just working so hard.
But around 6,000 calories.
6,000.
Depending on the type of work that you're doing, the calculations on the amount of calories that people would have expended by working so many hours a day doing various agricultural tasks. And it's depending on what it was. It's, 5, 6, 7,000 calories. So it's a lot of calories people have got to sort of put away. So to get back to John Ferry.
Sorry, I jumped in.
This is me digressing as well. But he talks about them making them 16 to 18 inches in diameter, and then them being flipped with a cake slice and a bake sprittle. So it's like a sort of big bat used to sort of flip the thing over, because of course it's 16 to 18 inches round. You're going to need to be able to keep it steady to flip it over.
Yeah, you need a good size. That's a good word, sprittle.
Yeah, so he mentions those, and as I say, he mentions the doshen, and he describes how it's dexterously shoved under the cake, the baked sprittle is. Mm-hmm. It's turned over, thrown again on the stone, smoothed if necessary. It all takes place within a couple of minutes on each side, so it doesn't seem to take very long to cook them. And once they're cooked, they're put over an earthenware pan, pansion perhaps he means, to steam, and then they make another one, and then the one that's been on the pan is then put onto a board with a pile of others. So they're making them in batches, is the way he's describing it. And at the end of the sort of the operation, after so many have been cooked, they'll wipe the bakestone down with a greasy rag, which is a wonderful image. Yeah. Every 3 or more cakes, he says, prevent them burning, they'll wipe it down with this greasy rag. So I mean it's a lovely description from 200 years ago about them making them in batches at this farmhouse.
That greasy rag, though, if you're making pancakes, you've got to get most of the oil out of your pan, because otherwise it just shallow fries. You don't want to shallow fry a pancake. No. You just want to stop it sticking. So I use, disposable kitchen paper to spread my oil on my pancakes. Right. So basically what they're doing is exactly the same principle. Yeah, it's made it sound very hygienic by saying oily rag.
No, and he does tend to have a sort of a sort of fairly negative view. I mean, although he talks about, in quite depth, and he's obviously performing his brief and telling about what goes on. His sort of summation of this is that, the people in Derbyshire do tend to live quite well, even though the fact that they eat oatcakes all the time, So, despite the fact that they live on oatcakes, they seem to be doing all right.
Yeah, slightly snobbish gentleman. Which probably not, he's obviously interested.
He is,
but it's very much from an anthropological point of view. He's not one of them.
My God, what do these people do? Yeah. But but it has to be said, John Ferry's work on this and on other people's work in other counties is fantastic. The detail, the level of detail that they collected.
No, it's amazing that it's captured, because no way would we know this information otherwise.
We wouldn't.
No way. We know how they're being made from that amazing information from Mr. Ferry, and that farmer's wife was making them. I guess it was that the household he was.
He doesn't mention who it is who's making them. You sort of assume that it may be one of the servants that's doing it. Because he's Mr. Joseph Gould. So a Mr. Gentleman status.
Yes.
So it's presumably one of his servants. Okay. But female or male servant, it's difficult to know. There's subsequent people writing in the 20th century assume that farmers' wives made them.
Yeah.
I think that's because they did in the 20th century. But equally, a lot of the people who professionally made oatcakes were men. So there's not necessarily that division.
Yeah, there is always that division, though, isn't there, with bakers being men, housewives making...
Well, you do find bakers who are women as well. You do find oatcake bakers who are women. I think perhaps latterly descriptions of them from the later 19th century and the 20th century, it will be women, farmers' wives who are making them.
And, you alluded this to right at the beginning of our chat. You don't think every household's making them, though?
And I think this is the thing. So the critical thing that Ferry mentions is he mentions the doshens, he mentions the baked sprittles, the bakestones. And then, as I said, I'd looked into probate inventories 15 years ago. I started looking at them and looking through probate inventories, which are records of when somebody died, the goods in their household. And they are tremendously useful for getting you into fairly ordinary people's houses. At that,
you can have a nose around their house.
Yeah, exactly. They're a wonderful. There are caveats with using them, which I'll not go into too much. But but they do give you a nosy into somebody's house 400 and 500 years ago, 400 years ago, 300 years ago. The great thing is that in mentioning those words, you look for those specific words, those specific things, and bakestones, doshens. That's the things people will have if they're making oatcakes. They're not very common. Okay. You find them in Derbyshire. Yeah. Admittedly, you do find them. You don't find them in Nottinghamshire. I found one instance of a guy who's got a bakestone who lived in Southwell, but then by no means you find a lot more of them in Derbyshire, definitely, but you don't find every household with them. It's a bit like baking equipment, where people have got peels or they've got leaven tubs or tubs for kneading troughs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You find those in some inventories, but not in that many. Around about a fifth of the inventories I've looked at have got those things. So most people aren't baking their own bread. They're buying it from bakers in the Tudor period, in the Stuart period, and into the 18th century. Likewise, I think most people aren't baking their own oatcakes. They're buying them from oatcake bakers.
I see.
People who set up to make, and there's a lovely inventory of a guy who lives not too far away from where we are now, just on the outskirts of Chesterfield, and he's making oatcakes and also making other types of bread as well. A guy called Henry Sutton, and he's got the equipment for making the oatcakes. He's got the equipment for making bread as well listed. And I found that that's an inventory from the 1660s. And I find that such an interesting thought about, he's making all these different sorts of bread. Is he making it for people, different customers?
Yeah.
Or is he making it for the same customers who want one thing one day and one thing another? That's a really nice inventory. You do find other inventories further into the Peak District where they just got the equipment for making oatcakes.
Do you get much of an idea of how much they were enjoyed?
So this is the thing. I think they are said to be enjoyed by the people, the native inhabitants.
Mm-hmm.
But that's based on only a few quotes. There's a guy called Philip Kinder who wrote a history of Derbyshire. He was a native of Derbyshire, was at Oxford, and in the mid 17th century, he wrote a manuscript history of the county, and he describes how people in Derbyshire enjoy oatcakes.
Yeah.
He said they've got really strong teeth through the mastication of their oat bread.
Okay.
So
with jaws.
Yeah. So this again, I think refers back to that the ones we're familiar with now, which we'll talk about later on. The ones that sell at the moment are quite thin. Whereas you can imagine that with the way Fairy describes them as 16 to 18 inches across, quarter of an inch thick, that there will be some mastication involved in.
No, indeed.
In chewing your way through that.
Yeah.
So the people of Derbyshire are said to have really strong teeth through eating their oat bread. But he says they enjoy it. So they really like people that like the oatcakes. And from 150 years later, Humphrey Davy, inventor of the miner's lamp, he's talking about Derbyshire miners and peaklanders and saying that they enjoy oatcakes because he said that they feel it gives them extra strength to perform their labours better.
Okay.
This sort of continued preference almost for oat bread. But people from outside their region, they tended to find it more sort of unusual. And
unusual good?
Unusual,
or unusual bad?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's more unusual bad.
Right.
So the first example would be from around the time of John Fairy and of Humphrey Davy, actually, in the early 19th century. One thing that John Fairy mentioned at the end of his description of oatcakes is how that they're made this way and served to the apprentices at Lytton Mill. Now, these apprentices were London, by and large, were orphans from London who were sort of indentured to go and work up in, back and beyond.
I see, yeah.
And they were fed on oatcakes. There were reports from a sort of generation later of some of these apprentices once they'd grown up, and described the harshness of their environment because it did become a bit of a sensation that these kids were being sent up almost like slave labour.
Yeah,
and so there was a bit of an outcry about it. And one of the descriptions of the guy called Robert Blincoe who describes his treatment there. And one of the sort of items of torture is being made to eat oatcakes. So they really weren't seen as popular. That was part of one of the things they found so strange about this environment was the oat bread. But also earlier than that, again going back to the research I did on the Willoughbys.
Yes.
One of the things I found in the Willoughby accounts was that they ate oatcakes. Now, this is a family living in Nottinghamshire, South Nottinghamshire, just to sort of west of Nottingham at Wollerton. That they ate oatcakes, but they ate them in Lent. And I thought this is interesting, that they're eating oatcakes in Lent. And then I also came across another family living this time in South Derbyshire, so out of the oatcake zone, if you like.
Yes.
in south, just south of Derbyshire, in a place called Foremark, Francis family. They also were buying oatcakes in Lent. And it conjures up this image of these wealthy gentry families buying oatcakes to eat as almost like a penance.
Okay.
Forcing themselves to eat oatcakes.
Oh dear. Oh, poor oatcakes. Have you ever had a go at making these older-fashioned ones?
I've not, no.
Right. I've had a go. Definitely the spreading it around with a ladle. Like
right. Yeah.
You mentioned that quote is definitely something you have to do because you do end up with just fried porridge if you don't spread it thin enough.
You've not tried to do it a 1/4 inch thick then?
I haven't tried to do it 1/4 inch thick.
Or 16 to 18 inches
I don't know
across.
how that can be done.
You'll need a bake stone.
You need somebody to show you. That's the thing. You can't work. It's so impossible. It's nigh on impossible to work these things out. Unless you're Peter Breers or Ivan Dane, who are happy to spend weeks working these things out. The ones that I've made, I've been sourdough, pure oats, put no wheat in there, and I thought they were good. Yeah, I thought they were good. Maybe they weren't quite as stodgy, maybe as the ones described, but just that sourdough flavour with oats, which we're not used to.
Were they crisp?
They were floppy.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. I saw a description. I have to say, this was a Staffordshire oatcake, so this might be controversial. But apparently, you had to be able to roll it round a stick of butter.
Oh, okay.
That was one of the indications of what it was like. So I thought, okay, that's what I'm aiming for. Yeah. And it took a long time to get the exact consistency right. It was between adding not enough or too much of a tablespoon of water. It was a difference between making something that you could roll round some butter without it breaking because there's no gluten in there. So it's really, really hard. It did take me a while to work out how thin the batter had to be and then just how much you had to spread it out with the ladle because it wouldn't naturally form a pancake like a drop scone does or something like that today. You really had to kind of guide it. I was quite pleased with myself, I have to say, because I just thought there's no way I'm going to be able to do this just because I've had no one to show me. I've got no cues. I don't know what to look for.
It's that sort of passing down the generations about. And this is the interesting thing about the Derbyshire Oatcakes is that at some point that sort of chain breaks because the way that they were being made, the thick sort of ones that were being made in the 19th century are still being made in the 20th century. So this guy, this strange Leeds physician, Dr. Thomas Bedford, whose papers are at the Brotherton in Leeds University, He went out, seemed to get a bee in his bonnet about oatcakes in the 1930s because the Yorkshire ones were slowly disappearing, the sort of ones hung upon and dried. Yes. And he sort of came south to Derbyshire. He found out about the Derbyshire ones, wrote about them, and he describes them being really big, people making them really big. But at some point, that sort of tradition of making them in farmhouses died out. Bakers that are making them now, they are a lot thinner and a lot smaller. In some cases, even passing the batter on or the dish that made it, because there's a lady called Nora Toft who wrote a description of making Derbyshire Oatcakes in the 1930s in Derbyshire Countryside magazine, and she describes how the vessel in which they're kept is handed down from mother to daughter sometimes. Right, that's great. But she doesn't call it a doshen. And she calls a doshen, she said the doshen is the spoon that they used, which it isn't. I mean, the definition of the doshen that you find in the early 19th century is the tub in which it's done. So the words are kind of losing their meaning. They're just words. They've just gone. And that sort of whole business of making them, by the time Nora Toft is talking about it, she's talking about people using yeast, fresh yeast to make them, rather than sort of, and adding that to them. And some of the recipes that survive from the early 20th century, they're starting to add wheat flour, they're starting to add sugar, sometimes they're putting milk in there as well. So the recipes are sort of starting to change to basically adapt to using in, perhaps, I hesitate to say urban kitchens, but most people by that time have moved from the countryside into smaller houses.
One thing that I've noticed is looking, because I've looked at a lot of recipes, because I've been looking a lot into just general sort of wild ferments in the UK. And you see lots of introductions in modern recipes for Staffordshire and Derbyshire oatcakes. And they always talk, they've obviously done their research and read descriptions about the wonderful sour tang that they have, obviously because people were using sourdoughs. But then they give the recipe with a bit of baking powder in, and it doesn't have that tang.
Yeah.
So they're looking at the old descriptions, but they're not looking at the old recipes or accounts of how they were made.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where I was very confused because I was making these modern recipes going, but there isn't a sour tang. What am I doing wrong? And it was only then when I started looking into it that I realised, I was like, oh, okay, people are researching, but not quite, they're just skimming the surface and not quite getting it right.
Yeah, because part of it was to leave the batter.
Yeah.
That's how you made it and then you left it. That's the sort of what Fairy talks about is they're leaving the batter to ferment almost, for a day or two. There was one of these sort of esoteric little things that pops out the Derbyshire Times from the 19th century was somebody talking about the local sprite called Hobhurst, who's like a goblin,
right?
A story, a fairy story, fairy story, literally John Fairy.
Oh, yeah.
But it's sort of this is a folk tale, shall we say, from Derbyshire. And one of the things that Hobhurst does is he stops your oatcake batter from rising if he feels like he's been maligned or slighted in a particular household. Yeah.
So what do you think the future of the Derbyshire oatcake is? Do you think it's going to just happily trundle along as a kind of sort of niche but much beloved product, or do you think it's just going to fizzle?
I think
what do you reckon?
I would hope that it will, that it's got enough sort of behind it now that it's going to be something that's going to be there for, well, as far as we can see. I would have thought for a few generations. I think it's something that's going to carry on. There are people making them. There are people who've taken over businesses that are making them. There's an example being the Derbyshire Oatcake and Pikelet Company, who are centred in Bakewell.
Right.
They took over an established business that was making oatcakes. That had been supplying various places in Chesterfield and all around about. So there is a demand for them now, and they sort of supply lots of these delis and farm shops, which is where you can find these things. They sell them in the supermarket down the road, sells them.
Oh, right, okay.
So yeah, I mean, and down in Derby, there's the Derby Pikelet Company. They took over an established business run by the monks who've been running it since the early 20th century. So there's a kind of a tradition there that's been built on, that they're very popular as well.
Right, that sounds very healthy, not as niche as I assumed.
No, and
that's really good.
You go to some of the restaurants in the Peak District, some of the cafes even, and they've got oatcakes on the menu. So it is I think a live tradition now, but more of an artisan one rather than a sort of an everyday thing.
Oh no, well it's great that they're still very much alive. Yeah. That's very encouraging. Hey, it's time to wrap up. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. This has been good fun.
Thank you for inviting me, Neil.
Such a rich topic. It sounds like it's probably irrelevant to other people, but you open it up so niche. And actually it says just so much about society and traditions and cooking methods, and it's so fascinating, this stuff, I think. How can people find or see your good work?
I have a website in which I have links to the things I've written.
Oh, great. Okay.
That's mdfoodhistory.weebly.com. I'll
make sure that's in the show notes.
And if anybody's within reasonable striking distance, I do talks.
Oh, yeah.
And they're listed on SpeakerNet. I've got a profile on SpeakerNet.
Oh, yes.
So I tend to do talks around Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, South Yorkshire, even as far as Lincolnshire sometimes, if I'm persuaded. People have got groups and things, I tend to go out and do talks. But I am also writing a book on traditional food in Derbyshire.
Oh, fantastic.
For Amberley.
Oh, great.
Publishing.
Oh, great.
And a lot of the stuff on oatcakes, a lot of the research I've done on oatcakes.
The first half is going to be on oatcakes, right?
Absolutely. Probably might even be 60%. Won't be me rambling about oatcakes until their editor comes back to me and tells me to talk about something else.
Oh, that's great.
I think that's due out. I'm certainly due to have written it by the back end of this year.
Okay. Yeah, well, we know what that's like. Oh, well, that's really exciting. Oh, brilliant. Well, you have to come on and talk to us about the rest of the amazing food.
Of Derbyshire food that isn't oatcakes. Yeah,
indeed. Oh. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you very much, Mark. I am very much looking forward to Mark's book, Derbyshire's Food and Drink, published by Amberley, due out next year. I hope he'll come back on to talk about his work that went into that book. There are links to Mark's books, his SpeakerNet profile, plus more on some of the people, places and things mentioned in today's episode. If you have any comments, questions or queries regarding this or any other episode, please contact me or leave a message on social media. Do you have something to say, ask or add regarding Derbyshire Oatcakes, or any oatcakes for that matter? Remember, there will be a postbag episode at the end of the season. Email me, neil@britishfoodhistory.com, or find me on social media or on YouTube, of course, and leave a comment there. Or you can go to the British Food A History Facebook discussion page. There's links to the show notes. Oh, and you can go on the Spotify app too, of course. If you can, please support the podcast and blogs financially and donate a one-off coffee or pint, or start up a monthly £3 subscription. Thank you to everyone who have already done that. If you'd like to find out more, go to britishfoodhistory.com and click on the Support the Blog and Podcast tab, where you can find out about all of the benefits of becoming a subscriber. But there are lots of other sorts of ways to support, so please spread the word, leave positive reviews, and rate the podcast with 5 stars, please. Also, don't forget those early bird tickets for the Servit 4th Food History Festival on the 18th of October. The mixing and sound recording was done by Thomas Ntinas of the Delicious Legacy podcast. Please check out his recent episode on anchovies, a very important fish, food history speaking. But it's time for me to go. Until next time, cheerio.